The landscape of Jericho Beach and its attached park is vibrant and very obviously serves innumerable needs of the city's public. But look closer, however, you can spot the hidden conflicts that we saw, many of which were already set in motion thousands of years ago.
Jericho Beach Park is situated in the West Point Grey neighborhood of Vancouver and consists of 47 acres of land. Prior to European colonization, the land was known as Ialmuk to the Squamish. It was a rich tidal estuary fed by 3 streams which flowed to the beaches, and was used by not just the Squamish, but also the Musqueam and Tsleil-Waututh nations for fishing and hunting. The modern name of Jericho actually has almost nothing to do with the biblical city, but rather comes from settler Jeremiah Rogers, who turned the area into the Jerry and Co. logging camp, a company name which would later become corrupted into Jericho. Jerry and Co. was then followed by an air station of the Royal Canadian Air Force in the 1920s, and in 1968 the land changed hands again to the City of Vancouver, who designated it as a park, and it has since become the recreational hotspot we recognize today.
We visited the area a few times earlier this week and took stock of the site at various times of day. From this, we observed the manifest examples of the ideas we had been discussing, those ideas being public as a system of processes, public as determined by socio-political forces, and not everyone is welcome as the public. To elaborate on these conflicts, each of us are going to be diving into a specific example of a conflict where we saw these concepts in action. The birds policing the beach.
The first conflict which we identified in Jericho Beach Park was how highly regulated the site was. The beaches, as well as the wetlands and peripheral forests, were absolutely full of signposts. There were precautionary signs, signs about regulations, signs trying to educate, and all sorts of others. One of the signs, from those warning about the danger of coyotes to the ones admonishing rabbit feeding, were clear and plain signs of regulation. Much of the evidence of conflict was much more subtle, to the point of being almost invisible. For example, this year the Vancouver Parks Department asked for $930,000 to deploy extra officers on beaches and waterfront parks across Vancouver. This was to expand the presence of officers, rangers, and park operations as part of an Alcohol on the Beach pilot project. We did observe signs demarcating where it was permitted to drink and where it was not, mainly around paved areas and paths, but we found bottles and cans strewn around the beach, and after returning multiple days, we saw no visible effort being made to remove the trash and enforce the regulation. With this in mind, consider that a 2020 Vancouver bylaw report determined that temporary shelters would not be permitted in sensitive environments or natural areas, ostensibly over concerns regarding trash and its impact on the environment. We observed far fewer instances of human impact on trash in the less traveled forested areas of the park. Relatedly, this year, paid parking has been trialed at nearby Spanish Banks, which has been used as the ground for displacing the people who had been living there in their vehicles. It's an easy leap to connect all these examples of high regulation into a single cohesive narrative, which belies the park's conflict with its vision of the public. From the omnipresent signage trying to control the usage of the park, to the vastly increased enforcement which penalizes certain demographics while facilitating others, to the usage of paid parking regulations to evict overnight vehicles, you can easily see that regulations can directly inform a definition who the public is, as defined by the most influential users of a park, in this case the City of Vancouver and the Parks Board.
The second conflict we identified was the clashing uses and competing interests between the human and non-human users in the park. This was primarily observed through the presence of trash and how users created and interacted with it, especially in the intertidal zones, where the presence of microtrash on the beach reshapes the environment, and also on the picnic tables, where discarded food is picked at by scavengers. Efforts to control invasive plants dominate the human-non-human interactions in the marsh and forested areas. We could see signs all over warning about how glyphosate was recently sprayed to manage Japanese knotweed, and this was directly adjacent to known rabbit warrens and bodies of water. Glyphosate is a known toxin, with evidence showing it causes cancer in animals, and it is difficult to ignore the direct impact which this herbicide control of an invasive species has had on another species which the city has also deemed an invasive, the domestic rabbit. It would not be a leap of the imagination to draw further connections regarding which non-human users the city accepts and to whom they cater, and which are excluded and exterminated. First introduced to the park by owners abandoning their pets, the rabbits of Jericho have become both famous and infamous, and the city considers them an invasive species threatening the park's biodiversity due to the impact of their grazing on the native flora of the park. Similarly, back in the year 2020, coyotes were determined to be a nuisance and a danger in Stanley Park. This resulted in the installation of signs throughout the city which warn people not to feed or interact with coyotes. Despite human endeavors to control them, coyotes are famously wily, and the physical evidence of this conflict can be seen exemplified in the ways in which the crafty canids find means and methods to bypass human barriers such as fences. We should also not forget about the Jericho beavers, who are currently being affected by drought conditions, leading to increased incidences of predation as their lodges are without their protective moats, all of which can be observed in the rapidly drying wetlands. The livelihoods, and even the very right to live itself, of the non-human parties of Jericho Park are constantly in conflict and constantly being directly determined by human management, whether said management, or lack thereof, is facilitating their existence, or it is actively trying to eradicate it.
The last of the three conflicts we have for you to think about today is that of gentrification and displacement. During our site visits, as we walked through the neighborhood, we observed a variety of housing typologies, from single-family housing to apartment complexes, in a melange of economic middle and upper classes. The settler history of housing in the area began in 1892 when the Jericho Golf and Country Club was established, filling in old streams and culverts to create buildable land. The 1976 visit of the United Nations Habitat Conference on Human Settlements and Habitat then initiated renovation efforts to re-establish biodiversity across the area's ecosystems. Currently, the project known as the Jericho Lands is a proposed redevelopment of a 90-acre site directly adjacent to the eponymous beach. To help address the housing crisis in Vancouver, a comprehensive planning program was undertaken by the Canada Lands Company in conjunction with the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Partnership, or the MST Partnership for short, to identify and evaluate new policies to redevelop for density. This plan is rife with conflict and controversy. However, as 70% of Vancouver residents disapprove of the current plan, citing issues such as the projected population density of 28,000 being twice as high as the density in Oak Ridge and higher than the West End. How might this redevelopment affect those who currently live in and around Jericho Beach? To bring this conflict down to a more personal and heuristically tangible level, Joey McDonald is someone whose story can be found in the Daily Hive Vancouver. He tells of having formerly been a passionate videographer, but falling on hard times over COVID and having no choice but to relocate to single-room occupancies, or SROs. These places were harsh, stressful, and took a severe toll on his well-being, so he decided to relocate again to the forested areas of Jericho Beach. Despite life in a tent being more difficult, he found it vastly more preferable to the SROs, and vastly better for his mental health as well. Park rangers confiscated his tent, however, giving the justification that it damages the forest. Does Joey have less of a right to exist and live in this space than the middle and upper class people? The proposed plan also aimed to connect and improve the connectivity of the green space to the waterfront. How will these ecological proposals impact the park's definition of who gets to be the public? Like everything, planning is inextricable from politics.
In the perennial negotiation of who gets to be included in the public, and by extension whose needs are met or neglected, sometimes the forces of inclusion and exclusion are blatant, but sometimes also they are more elusive as well and are only apparent through tough, thorough analysis. By looking at the embodied, manifested traces of various conflicts from the struggles between human users such as colonialism, government overregulation, or the struggles between different social groups, to conflicts between human and non-human users like the spraying of herbicides and pesticides, or the attempts to control and fence in land, one can extrapolate out the cohesive story of who is using Jericho Beach, what they need from the park, and how those needs butt up against each other, as well as observe the resulting conflict and friction. Truly a bunch of competing interests.